Welcome everybody this afternoon to our meeting on Darcus Howe, A Political Life. My name is Moira Samuels. I'm a long-standing member of the Socialist Workers Party, member of the NUT, sixth form teacher in East London. But I've also been a resident of Notting Hill, Ladbroke Grove, for a number of years. And that's when Darcus and I came into contact. Darcus was always there, in particular around the key fights around the Mangrove. And though I was a recent comer to Ladbroke Grove and part of the very last fight for Frank Critchlow to be released, Darcus was always central and well known around the area. He was also, I think, for those of us around who were fighting against racism, he was always a key figure and a representative as one of the staunchest fighters against racism. So I won't say any more. I'll let Darcus and his publisher, or his author, talk about Darcus's life, which his political life, which has gone on for quite a long time. And it's lovely to have him here.
Thank you for having me. It's not always people enjoy it or want me, but I'm here today upon the publication of my political biography. I didn't solicit them. I did not solicit the publishers. It is this man and the other one, they wanted to do this about me. And I said yes. And at the back of my head, I remembered other people who wrote other biographies, and they were nasty, vicious, the opposite of reality. And I didn't have to spend any length of time, a little talk, and I thought that they would not wish to take me on. The police had to think twice before they took me on. Some allegations in the Old Bailey and stuff. So he wouldn't do that. And they wrote the piece. I read it objectively. That is to say that it's not about me, it's about this guy who I know from Trinidad, whose father was a priest and his mother was a teacher, and who arrived in this country in April of 1962. I came here, and I'm still here. And I, therefore, as I speak today, I want to tell you that I'm looking through the lens of an immigrant. I am not English, I never wanted to be. I am not a nationalist, even though I was born in Trinidad and Mrs. Thatcher gave me a passport, double citizenship. It don't mean anything to me. And that's how many years? 58 now? And that is Mrs. Howe, in which time I married her. And the other day we went to a meeting, something quite like this. And the chairman said, and Darcus Howe has brought his wife. And I thought, I have never met anybody who could bring Leela Hassan at all. And I put him in his place. I said, my wife is not a bag. So shut up. So I'm now released of all of that talking to you as an immigrant. I do that severely because one of the great issues of this time of the nationalist poison that has been part of colonial country, that is England, there was France, all Africa they were, India. So I have seen the world through the lens of an immigrant. They didn't come and find me in Africa, I wasn't born there. I came to Trinidad, I was born in Trinidad. My father was an Anglican vicar, my mother was a school teacher. I went to a public school, one of the best. It's like Eton and Harrow and stuff. a little Negro, born in a house at the seaside, learning William Shakespeare at the age of 10, and being taken up with Shakespeare's sonnets. I also made a friend with Philip Pirrop. He was The Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. Now I'm not teaching, I'm just telling you the word I met. And when I fell from the comfort on the 26th of February, and on that day, 20 million people died in the world. The war against World War II. I can't imagine it to this day. Fell from the comfort of my mother's womb in Nurse Connolly's nursing home. And the same day, my life, which was quite obvious, and the others of Trinidadians and West Indians who went to fight in Egypt, they didn't bother with them. And in all of that mess of the advanced countries of the world, they managed to kill millions of people a day. So that when I'm looking and talking to them about my view on the world and my activism on the world, it is, I am stuffed with reality. I am stuffed with making to stand up and sing God Save Our Gracious Queen. I had gone through the struggle for independence. India started it. The west coast of Africa started it. And the Caribbean islands joined it. And by the time it reached Trinidad, we genuflected before the Queen. And the principal was Cambridge University. And he taught me English. And there was another man who enjoyed the game of cricket. And I was one of the top class players of the day, of my age. It's in the book. A vice captain of West Indies cricket, Derek Murray, he says. Darcus was very good. I didn't think much of it. I was just running up and delivering a medium-pace ball. I didn't. It is now in talking about it I understand what has shaped me. As these question me who I am, where I'm from, how I became an atheist with your father, parish priest. That is quite something to achieve. Quite something to achieve. And my Mrs. Howe, he was also head of the school. And I was confirmed, and I had to give the bishop confession to say that I was looking under somebody's dresser when she was in a bathroom, and I'd seen all of that. My mother left some grapes, and there were 10 grapes, and I took 2. And lied when she asked me, you know, you confess, that is before Easter weekend, and Easter Sunday you had to confess. And confess before Good Friday, because it's the day of punishment. So I grew quite easily. When I came here, and still now, there are citizens who ought to have known, who knew nothing whatsoever about me. Where are you from? Let's ask your wife. It was very nasty. They knew nothing about me, that we were savage. Not only color of skin, it was that we were savages. And the best fun you could have is kick a black man to death. And I walked the streets at the time in West London. There was a man called from Notting Hill Gate, from Antigua, and they stuck a knife in his heart and executed him because he was black. And they never charged or held anybody. And it is in that we celebrated his funeral with a steel band music and dancing on the streets, and that is the birth of Carnival. There were only about 40 of us. Today, 1 million. Because we kept our eyes on the proverbial ball, and that was British police, and that was really there, and told us as a child that it's the best police in the world. Well, it's the worst set of bastards I have ever met. For 10 years, I have never been on bail, and I have never one day committed a crime. You know how that man is? Darcus Howe is my lawyer. I spent 55 days in the Old Bailey, inciting members of the public to kill police officers. Now, I went to Queen's Royal College. I got a first grade and distinction in French, Latin, and Spanish, literature and English and stuff. And they have me like I'm some, I don't know, imprisoned in my own head, I guess. And there are some of us who decided, post the man they killed, the police, and who knew the man they killed, and we decided to stop it, and we decided to take them to the finish. The time that we tell people all this the Bobby and stuff, that is not true. They persecuted and prosecuted West Indian people in this country, not far away, in Notting Hill, Ladbroke Grove Road. I lived there. You could blindfold me, and I could walk around there until I'm at the corner of All Saints Road and Westbourne Park. I used to be the chairman of the Carnival Committee and drew up a constitution and wanted it to be there forever, because when I brought myself here, I didn't bring a false imagination of white colonials. I came here as the son of Lucille Howe and Cipriani Howe, of my grandfather, who was a stevedore, and my grandmother, and so some of you may know C.L.R. James, and now I could straighten this now. Cyril Lionel Robert James, a Marxist. His mother and my grandmother were sisters. And when I left Trinidad to come here to study law, I went to see my grandmother to say goodbye. It was 40 miles away from where we lived. And in those days, 40 miles away was a long drive. And she said to me, when you go to England, find CLR. Do whatever you have to do to find him, and you will never, ever regret it. I think that is one of the reasons why I sit here in the SWP. We may not be on the same current, but nevertheless, Marxism has been part of the view that educated me on what I met here in this country. I am not English. I have an English passport. I am, and the book reads that way, I hope. I'm not English. I'm Caribbean. I went to school in England, even though it was East Port of Spain, Trinidad. When I first came here, I tell you how ridiculous this and imperial this thing was. I've been here for about a month. I was a postman. I mean real postman. And I'm coming home in a car. I was going to Forest Hill. And I fell asleep before. When I opened it, I saw Dulwich College. I didn't know it was. I thought, what the hell has happened to me? It's like seeing a ghost situation. It was the same color, salmon, and a light gray. Even down to painting the building, we were dominated by the British state to be colonials. Not quite slaves, but colonials. Yes, sir, no, sir. And there's a current in it too, who are against. All over the West Indies, there was a current of intellectuals, of working class people who went the other way. Communist Party, Trotskys. In all of the West Indian islands, that happened. And it has developed and continues, as you continue today, continues in Trinidad and Tobago. I was a boy when the British didn't too want to give independence. They had to fight India for that. And a lot of people died for that. They fought West Coast, that is in Nkrumah. There's some soldiers who fought in the war, went up to the governor's palace and said, I want a job. And they executed them. That is the British that people so civilized. Murdered them. And then they turned on the Mau Mau in Kenya and murdered them too. And when it was time for Trinidad and we said we wanted independence, that groundwork had been laid, and there was a retreat in British Parliament and a retreat in Downing Street from hijacking everything that we have and turn us into little images of white Britons. I enjoyed fighting it because I ain't that. I'm dark as the night. I speak English properly. I love Shakespeare's sonnet. And Charles Dickens gave me a friend that I don't forget to this day, and his name is Philip Pirrop. And I came here and I listened and I looked and I listened. And there was a time of serious disappointment to know that the English working class was so backward on the question of race. Because we in the West Indies had formed trade unions and carried the struggle as workers. And now they're killing the police, killing the anti-gun boy. Well, I don't complain. I could give you a good fight. And they have been up my backside for years, and I wouldn't back down. 65 days in the Old Bailey, and I wasn't looking for sympathy, I was looking for a fight, and they got it, and I won it. Now, please, help me now. And it is in there I understood not that sacrosanct English person. I understood English people who were not even the caricature or the publicity by the Queen and her husband and the rest of them. One of them is sitting there. Her name is Gareth Pierce. Any fight I ready for with the establishment, and I needed Gareth, she would come and speak what she thought, not what she ought to say. And so through my lens, through my experience, I have a different view. Otherwise, I become, sometimes in struggle, you become that which you are fighting. So I could come and call you white here. Get some blacks to beat white people and write some crap about the Notting Hill Carnival. I just want to say two statements about that. I'm saying we because I was the chairman of the Carnival Development Commission. When we had the first chip and drive and the dance and the prance, we didn't know there would be all those people. There were about 100 of us. You know, many people come from all over Europe, all over Germany, all over France, all over Holland, America, Canada, where all their Trinidadian carnivals, and from the West Indies, all over 1 million people come here. Now, I don't know how you police 1 million people. You have to have 2 million police or some kind of ratio. And they were determined to close it down. And they lost. There is a man called Boris, whatever his stupid name is. His sister wrote an article. She was campaigning in the Daily Mail against Carnival and said a truck passed. Our black girls were shaking their body line, and the music was too loud, and the roof fell in. Oh, please tell me. Tell me. And she went to Switzerland and she got money for her roof. But she didn't dare say she went here because you could easily call the insurance people and find out. So the pens have become poison. A literary nation, the pens have been poisoned in the constant exploitation of those of another color. But I discovered two people who wanted to write a book on me. I was very nervous because I did not trust them. I didn't know them. And Mrs. Howe and I, I met her even in love and marriage and family. Mine came out of a political radical tradition. It wasn't love for politics. You don't like that? That's when there's no divorce. That's done. And these guys came and they went to Trinidad. They searched and searched, and they didn't harass me much. and going to English public schools like this book, I am always moved by prose. I don't know. I don't know. I like nice, neat prose. So I'm a Dickens man. And I like a little evocation from Shakespeare. And these guys were able to do that. Because you can't find some little kind of language with such, on issues and moments of such intensity, in which people's freedom, you had to write that seriously. And my lawyer friend, she always was at my side when the police, I don't know what they thought I was, but I had A levels in distinction in French, Latin, and Spanish. I don't know that I was a criminal. You know? Yes, I will tie it up now. There are one or two faces here. I say these things deliberately. You are not you. You've been going well. All I wish, all I know can happen, that the party that is in power and the little black friends, Chukwuma or whatever the hell his name is, that we are coming pretty close among your Winston, West Indians, to turn their way completely on the Labour Party and forever, and young whites who are coming through with that constant hostility to, what's his name again? Yeah, no, the other one. No, he was here when I was talking about Chukwuma. She's learned to read and write. I just sent a message to him the other day, that's a few days before now, and I said to him, if I ever hear you use the word austere and austerity, I will poison you. I'll throw you in the Thames. He said, well, I said, you know nothing. That is when people pick up little bits of words and conceal within them something quite else. Austerity, what is that? What is austerity? Nobody dare open your mouth. Because it has no meaning. It is just whenever you talk, you say austerity. It's austerity. You go to meager and take money from the treasury until people starve and do what they like. And lastly, there was a man called Mr. Farage. Now, I go to North London with a version, talking to a version of Trotsky's, whatever, all the splits and stuff. And one kid was an Asian man saying, this Farage, he's going to take over this country. I'm at the table. I said, who are you? He called his name. I said, let me tell you something. If Farage wins an election here, I will eat my hat with West Indian pepper sauce. That is out the question. That is out the question. Just as out the question is Labour coming back to govern with that same nonsense that they carried on. And I ask you one thing to do if you read prolifically. Try and get The Making of the English Working Class by E.P. Thompson, then you will know that there are other views of the British people who are not frightened by austerity, cannot be talked down to by, what is his name, Cameron? Should name Camera or something like that. Camera. I have no respect for them whatsoever. I'm not going to join any opposing party to talk against them, because all of us know it, what they are not about. And again, the world is changing. We don't need them. You see thousands of people coming out of Africa, drowning in the sea. You go to Tunisia for holiday, dead. You go somewhere in Pakistan, dead. And they govern the world. It wasn't the Prime Minister of Jamaica. All of them govern the world and have turned on us. One of the most barbaric periods in human history. That's what I want to see. I want to finish that. I'm speaking with passion today. But I am backing down. This is where we are. And I don't call you to join anything or take part with me in anything. I speak what I feel, not what I ought to say. The oldest has borne most. You that are young shall never see so much, nor live so long. Thank you for asking me to speak.
I just wanted to introduce, because I didn't at the beginning, one of the authors of the book, Robert Bunce, who is a Director of Studies for Politics at Homerton College. Robin is going to actually speak about Darcus's life, and he has a range of PowerPoint slides to present some of the pictorial images. Thank you, Robin.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming. As you said, yes, I'm one of the authors of Darcus Howe, Political Biography. I'm afraid to say Paul, my co-author, couldn't be here today, but he does send his regards. The title of Marxism 2015 is Ideas for Revolution, and my contention today is that if you're looking for ideas for revolution, a very good place to look would be the British Black Power movement. And I want to say a few words about Darcus's contribution to the British Black Power movement, because as we argue in the book, it was a very significant contribution. Lots of people know Darcus through his work on television, and normally when Darcus is introduced on Newsnight or on Question Time or whatever it is, he's introduced as Darcus Howe, broadcaster and writer. And of course, Darcus is a broadcaster and he is a writer, and that's all entirely true, but that is really only half the story, in fact, much less than half the story. So I want to say a few words about the other half of the story, about Darcus Howe, the person who worked in the Black Power movement in Britain. And I want to address the period, particularly at the end of the 60s and the beginning of the 70s. This is Darcus around about 1970. So this is Darcus as the kind of campaigning Darcus, who I'm going to talk about for a few moments. My first point is that Darcus made a significant intellectual contribution to the movement. And one of the things that is not properly appreciated, I don't think, certainly in the public at large, is that the Black Power movement was an intellectual movement. It was a movement of intellectuals. And Darcus played a very important role in working out what Black Power meant for Britain. Colonialism is not just one thing. I mean, there were different kinds of colonialism. And racism isn't one thing. There are different kinds of racism. And working out, therefore, what Black Power means in a British context or an English context, in a London context, was something that needed to be done. So Darcus was working with people like, Darcus met Walter Rodney. Darcus, as he said, is C.L.R. James's nephew. Darcus knew Stokely Carmichael. Darcus was steeped in the works of other black radicals such as Frantz Fanon and Angela Davis. And one of the important things that Darcus did was to try and work out what Black Power would mean in Britain. And one of the things he took from C.L.R. James was the idea of a small organization. That is to say that a Black Power movement wouldn't be a vanguard party. On a kind of traditional Leninist model, it would be a small organization. That is, say, an organization that records the struggle, an organization that gets alongside people who are struggling, and an organization which encourages people to formulate their own demands, form their own campaigns, and build their own institutions. Another important idea, and Darcus came to this understanding in around about 1968, at a similar time that Walter Rodney was speaking about grounding with my brothers. Another idea that Darcus another idea that Darcus kind of brought to black power in Britain was the idea that a black intellectual should ground with their brothers, that the black intellectual should always be part of the community which they are fighting for, as it were. And Darcus spent some time, as I said, with Walter Rodney in 1968 in Canada, and discussing those kind of ideas. Another important thing that Darcus brings to the Black Power movement in Britain is an international perspective. Darcus didn't start his political career in Britain. Rather, one of Darcus's first campaigns was in Ocean Hills, Brownville, in New York. This was a campaign run by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC, and it was a campaign to get decentralization of the American school system and to put black parents in charge of the education of their own children in New York. Yes, this was a kind of defining campaign in the Black Power movement in America, and Darcus was there working with H. Rap Brown on that campaign. Another campaign that Darcus was heavily involved in was the Black Power Revolution in Trinidad of 1970. And it's and you can see Darcus there speaking at one of the huge gatherings that the revolution almost overthrew the state there in 1970 in Trinidad, before it was unfortunately defeated by British imperialism and American imperialism. So Darcus was working with people from the movement as a whole, at large. Darcus was working in different contexts, and he brought this understanding to the British struggle, and it informed the strategies that he came up with, which were going to lead to some significant victories for the Black Power movement in Britain. One of the places you can find Darcus's early writings are in magazines like The Black Eagle or in magazines like Black Dimension. And it was in The Black Eagle that Darcus first set out an important strategy which was later, so this is published in 1968, that would later become the centerpiece of the campaign that Darcus was talking about, the Mangrove Campaign, 55 Days at the Old Bailey. Darcus trained to be a lawyer. He spent 2 years in Middle Temple training to be a lawyer. And he was thinking about how to take on the police. One of the things that Darcus realized quite early on was that if you are a serious black radical, that means you are going to get into trouble with the police. The police will come for you, the police will arrest you, the police will charge you with something, who knows what. But yes, the crucial thing is that to be a serious black radical, you need a strategy for dealing with the police. And Darcus's strategy was to ask for an all-black jury. Now, those of you who are aware of the Black Panthers in America will know this was one of the Panthers' demands. But what Darcus did was Darcus rooted it in English law by appealing to the Magna Carta. And he did this in relation to... he first came up with this in relation to a campaign to free Obibi Egbuna, who had been accused of inciting murder of police officers. Egbuna didn't have a strategy. Egbuna was, in fact, a rather reactionary leader. For example, he believed that black women have no revolutionary potential. I mean, that was one of the things that he was peddling back in the late 60s. And one of the other significant things that Darcus does is Darcus clears the way of the kind of reactionary first wave of black power leaders in order to get a properly progressive black power movement up and running. And one of the ways he does this is by coming up with a genuinely radical legal strategy that Egbuna was unable to when Egbuna was on trial for inciting the murder of police officers. The major campaign of this period was, as I said, the Mangrove Campaign, and this is Darcus speaking outside the Mangrove restaurant in August 1970. And here you see the thinking that Darcus has been doing, the reading that Darcus has been doing, the campaigns that Darcus has been involved in America and in the Caribbean. You see all of that experience brought to bear in Notting Hill. So from the Black Power Revolution in Trinidad, which started with a symbolic march, Darcus starts his campaign with a symbolic march to the centres of white power in Notting Hill, the 3 major police stations. Again, Darcus's big idea was to appeal not to white lawyers, not to white sympathetic people, of middle-class white people, but to appeal to the black community, to invite them to be shapers of their own destiny. And of course, that's what he does in the Mangrove March. He appeals to the black people of Notting Hill, the black working class, to defend the restaurant which has become the centre of their community, which has been subject to increasing police harassment. The march, due to police intervention, turned into a spontaneous melee, and Darcus and 9 others were charged with incitement to riot. And this is where Darcus's legal training and his legal mind came into play. So he came up with a legal strategy which would lead to a historic victory, and I'll tell you more about that in a moment. But the strategy worked like this. He demanded an all-black jury. And when the judge refused him that demand, he used the instruments at his disposal, so every single one of the 9 could disqualify jurors, to get a predominantly working class jury with 2 black people on it. The idea was that to get a jury that they could get a jury who would instinctively feel, or who knew what the police were like, and therefore a working class and a black jury was essential. Secondly, Darcus and Althea Jones-LeConte, who was in one of the earlier slides, represented themselves rather than speaking through lawyers. They represented themselves. This allowed them to speak directly to the jury. And therefore to cut through the legal mumbo jumbo and put their case directly to the jury. The third crucial aspect was to turn the tables on their accusers. Rather than merely defend themselves, the strategy was to put the police on trial, to expose police racism, to expose police brutality. And this led to a historic victory. The Mangrove Campaign not only led to the freedom of all 9 who were acquitted of the charge of incitement to riot, it led to the first official judicial acknowledgement that there was evidence of racial hatred in the Metropolitan Police. So the strategy was an enormous success. In addition to the court campaign, there was a grassroots campaign. So what was going on outside of the courtroom, what was going on around the Old Bailey, and in fact what was going on up and down the country was the Black Panthers, who were heavily involved in this. Darcus wasn't a member of the Panthers at the time, but he joined soon after, and he was working in collaboration with their leadership. They publish weekly reports of what's going on as part of a national campaign of solidarity with the 9 who are on trial. Darcus, of course, is not alone. He wasn't a one-man movement. He was working with other very, very influential people. I have some photos of some of them here. So this is Barbara Bees. This is Barbara she was one of the Mangrove 9. You can see her holding a pig's head. That's obviously representing the police there. And she was marching at the front of the march there.
Headless pig.
There is the Frank Critchlow, the owner of the Mangrove restaurant, another one of the Mangrove 9. In the centre left there, centre right, we have Farouk Donde with the glasses, who was nicknamed the Asian Trotsky on account of the beard, I guess. Olive Morris there with the megaphone, and Leela Hassan there protesting outside of the Central Criminal Court when Darcus when Darcus was on trial on another occasion. The work that happened in the Mangrove Campaign was obviously a victory in its own right, but it led to the birth of a new organisation called the Race Today Collective. And the Race Today Collective embodied C.L.R. James's notion of a small organisation. It was through the Race Today Collective that one of the largest squat in Europe was successfully organised in the 1970s. And it was through the Race Today Collective that Darcus helped organise the Battle of Lewisham, which was a campaign against the National Front marching through Lewisham. And it was through the Race Day Collective that the Black People's Day of Action, the largest ever march of Black people in protest at police negligence and the racist attack of the New Cross Fire took place in 1980. So the Mangrove Campaign, as I say, it was a victory in its own right, but it did lead to the birth of something new, the Race Day Collective. So there in a few moments is a kind of prehistory of Darcus Howe, the writer and journalist, as he's normally introduced. This is Darcus Howe, the grassroots radical and the intellectual who worked out what Black Power could mean and should mean in a British context.
The book is excellent. I can really recommend it. It's just a fantastic, rich, hidden history there that's uncovered. It's fantastically humorous and inspiring episodes of both mass action and some of the things you've shown there, especially the Black People's March and Day of Action and things, which is kind of written out of history. It was this tremendous march, thousands of people after the New Cross Fire through London, to kind of individual acts of kind of dissent and subversion, such as your attempt to have a citizen's arrest of police detective inspector or something at the Queen's Silver Jubilee in 1977 or something. Just amazing episodes and things like that. So yeah, the book is excellent, and thanks for coming in and telling us about it. I would just say, I mean, so you mentioned C.L.R. James. You see, C.L.R. James, I'd suggest, kind of really carried through kind of the important work of kind of intellectual, what I argue is kind of intellectually kind of conquering kind of imperial Britain, imperialist mythology, undermining and revolutionising understanding of slavery, abolition and stuff through works like the Black Jacobins, and then through his activism in Pan-Africanist organisations of the 1930s, such as the International African Service Bureau, spearheading a kind of challenge for anti-colonial liberation, which you described there, described Nkrumah, then how that fed into Nkrumah in Ghana later. I think what Darcus' achievements were to succinctly put it, is to really kind of see that project through. And I think you have a brilliant quote, which I don't have to hand, it's in your book, where you describe kind of a civilised, the Metropolitan Police, civilised kind of post-colonial British society in some ways, through this kind of tradition of Caribbean radicalism and kind of infusion of kind of Caribbean, kind of English radicalism. And I think when you talk about black power, the achievements of trying to situate black power in a British context, I think it's really important. I mean, just one final thing is, like, Stokely Carmichael, I think, came and spoke at a Dialectics of Liberation conference in 1967. And he gave, a fantastic, inspiring speech with, overwhelming thing. And I think Tariq Ali and Paul Foote are sitting in the audience, and both of them feel unable to kind of respond because Stokely Carmichael's really situating, he's kind of writing off the idea of a white working class being part of it. It's purely kind of a black struggle taken from the experience in the US, and trying to translate it. And it was, I think, the next day or something, but C.L.R. James was at this and then came and spoke as well at this Dialectics of Liberation conference. I don't know if you were there yourself.
Of course I was there.
You can tell, I'll shut up really, but you can tell us about it. But C.L.R. James then made some really important intervention, basically, and kind of, while sort of defending someone like Stokely Carmichael from kind of racist criticism, but also having a critique there, saying actually in a British context you can't write off the revolutionary potential of the white working class in that sense. And he defended the kind of revolutionary shop stewards movement that was going on at that time, the need for alliances. And I think I just think that's another kind of thing that Darcus, with Race Today Collective and there, I think. You did, for example, when a miners' strike broke out in 1984, make those links and stuff and try and build back those kind of links in a way, which is very different from kind of some views of black power. I'll leave it there. Okay, thanks.
I'm Ken Orlando, I'm a journalist on Socialist Worker, and I'm someone who's been following the struggle against racism in Britain pretty much all my life, and I've been inspired by people like Darcus, and the struggle that really lots of people who came and forced racism and race into the centre of politics, and really pushed things through the 70s. I think made a change so that in the 70s and 80s, certainly the left was involved in struggles. I mean, I think it was interesting discussing about Lewisham and so on, where Darcus was involved in that, Socialist Workers Party was involved in that sort of thing. People came together and talked about building a new sort of struggle. Now, what I think is interesting is, in a way, this is partly about looking back, it's a memoir, but also to look forward, because one of the things that happened with the struggles that you saw in the 70s was leadership coming up, people who came together, people like Darcus, later other people who came and said, we need to change things. And one thing that seems shocking at the moment is that we've had a whole series of terrible attacks from the government, increases in racism of all sorts, and yet in many ways the response seems very muted. And I think we were talking last night, there was a meeting which was talking about the prevent strategy and the way it's used it to attack Muslims across Britain. And the response, I suppose I'm looking to say, I think we need a sort of revolutionary response, that kind of response that people talked about, and people came together and said we have to take on this whole system. And what I'd like is some sort of a comment from Darcus, or from Robin, just about what you think can be done now, because I think some people sort of say it's almost as if it's all over now, that you can't bring together that kind of movement. But it seems to me that one of the things that people like yourself did was start from quite a low level often, when it seemed like there was an awful lot against you, and build up something, build a revolutionary challenge. And I'm just hoping for you to say, yes, we can do that again, and actually take on the racists again. Thank you.
Hi comrades, pleasure to be here. It's a bit more of a rant and kind of tie up with what's happening like these days really. I was part of the 72 people who were arrested at Westfield in regards to the Solidarity March in connection with what's happening in America and the Eric Gardner case. And the police tactics and obviously kind of the police response to it was up into many marches, especially in the last year or so, and the police response to it was very, very different to that, where it was very, very peaceful, and there was, I mean, people of all ages there, but you can't get away from the fact that there's institutional racism in the police, as we probably all know, but the problem is, I don't know how much of the general public would kind of be sympathetic towards it. Similar question to the last comrade, I wonder how you can maybe tie up, and because I feel, especially in England, we're speaking to loads of people, the general public, you hear a lot of, oh, but it's not the same here, it's not the same in England, because in America it is very, very racist, but in England we all mix very, very well, and there's probably very, very many reasons for that. There are a lot of black people and from ethnic minorities who have second generation, third generation immigrants who have progressed through the class system, so maybe they don't necessarily see the struggles that Darcus and everyone else previously went through. They don't necessarily relate to that as much. I feel as revolutionaries, or my position anyway, is constantly trying to kind of show them, to tie up that it's relevant to them, because however much however much they don't feel it exists within their lifestyle and what jobs they do, and wherever they are in the hierarchy, in demographic anyway within society, it still affects a lot of people, be it white or be it black or any other ethnic group. But yeah, like I said, I don't really have much to say. It was a pleasure to be here and hear you talk. But my one and only question would be, how do you think it's relevant, or maybe did you come across those same kind of struggles beforehand? So is it so different to how it was then? And yeah, do you feel like kind of the interracial, the mix that's gone on in Britain?
But something must be wrong with me, because I'm trying to get hold of your mind, but you slip away and you go to something else. And
yeah, no, I'm going to, like I said, yeah. So
I'm really up the creek.
Yeah, but yeah.
I'm sorry, but I can't get hold of it.
Yeah, it wasn't coherent, but yeah, like I said, I just wanted to speak out about it. But yeah, it's a pleasure to see all of you, and yeah, pleasure to be here as well. So.
Can I just ask a question?
Darcus, the phrase that I most recall you using is the phrase about how your children were able to grow up black with ease. Do you recall that phrase? Black.
Did I say that today?
Not today.
Oh.
It's the phrase that I've heard you say about how your children have been able to grow up black with ease in Britain.
Well, they had a strong father who could go crazy if you get in their way.
The youngest. The first grew up very angry.
Yeah.
The youngest grew up black with ease.
And I think my understanding of that.
I'll go with that.
My understanding of that is that precisely because of the struggles that people like yourself were involved in, society became better and easier for those of us who came later. I, for example, feel that I'm part of that generation who was able to grow up in a society that was easier for us. I was able to go to university. I've become a not particularly successful lawyer, precisely because, actually, But it's, you know, the circumstances in which people like me in the 1980s were able to go to university was because you had those struggles against, you know, the treatment of black kids as educationally subnormal, because you had people who, when they came over, like you, or like when my parents came over in the 50s and 60s, met with those signs saying no blacks, no dogs, no Irish, who went through those struggles, went through the horrific struggles, you know, the race riots in Notting Hill and so on, but fought back, made it easier for the generations that came later, like myself. And, you know, and it was because black activists like yourself, but also, and Christian talked about it, white socialists involved in the struggle, the Battle of Lewisham, setting up the Anti-Nazi League and so on, fought collectively together, that it made things easier for those of us who came forward. But my, in a sense, warning is that, of course, there's not just this linear progression, things gradually getting better and better. I think things did get better for a period of time, precisely because of those struggles. But we cannot afford to be complacent, and actually I think today there is a very serious racist offensive, an attempt to drive back so many of the gains that were run at that time. See, you mentioned Farage and how if Farage had won, you'd have eaten your hat with West Indian sauce. Of course, one of the great things about what was a horrific election night less than 2 months ago was the fact that Farage didn't win that seat in Thanet South. But for months and months and months, he was the favourite to win that seat, precisely because UKIP were on the charge. They did come top in the European elections last year. The widespread expectation was that they would win a whole number of seats and possibly even hold the balance of power and go into coalition with the Tory government. The fact actually that they won just the one seat, I think, was a tribute to the fact that people went out and campaigned to make sure that Farage didn't win that seat. But nevertheless, of course, they still won over 4 million votes. That, I think, is incredibly dangerous for us. It does mean that UKIP are still alive and kicking. It does mean that Farage, who, remember, said he would resign if he didn't win the seat, and he resigned for, 2 days, and then came back.
He's still resigning. Every day he resigns.
No, but I think the reason he came back was because although he didn't win the seat, there was a realisation that UKIP still have the potential to make a major breakthrough in Britain. And I think what that shows to us is that precisely the things that you were involved in the 60s and 70s and latterly, in encouraging younger activists, black and white, to fight back, to organise collectively and struggle, we need to make sure that we continue to do those things today, because I do think a racist offensive, literally every day, the attacks upon Muslims in particular are utterly relentless, and I think we need to make sure that we keep our side organised and struggle to make sure that we beat back that offensive.
Well, I'm going to be very quick, and I'm going to thank Darcus and Robin. Darcus for participating and Robin for writing the book. Because I grew up in Brixton very near, in fact I used to live around the corner from Darcus Howe. But I think the lessons to learn from the book are, one, that it is true that Black Power they made it a British version, but it wasn't done in isolation. It was an international perspective, because it's strange that they mention Obi Egbuna, and this was the same Obi Egbuna who visited Kwame Nkrumah in Guinea-Conakry, and Kwame Nkrumah recorded a message for the black people of Britain, that was played here, whereby Nkrumah was saying, like, look, the black people of Britain, why are you in Britain? It's because colonialism, capitalism and neocolonialism are strangling your homelands, and where can you run to, apart from the mother country? So I think the most important thing is that, we have to recognize the fact that even though we struggle in Britain, capitalism is an international system, and if we just look at our struggles, in Britain, without looking at them, internationally, well, I think we are on for a hiding, coupled with the fact that, Darcus mentions E.P. Thompson. And I think this book is an attempt, as E.P. Thompson says, to rescue the struggles of black people from the condescension of history. Because one thing you do notice is amongst a lot of black people that they are not aware of how we got where, we are. So I would encourage everybody, to read it, so that at least we can learn something about where we came from, so that, we can prepare for the battles ahead. Thank you.
So before Robin and Darcus come back, can I just remind everybody that Darcus will be signing any books anyone wants to buy.
It's interesting that Nigel Farage has been mentioned on a number of occasions, and it's interesting what Christian said about Darcus setting out his stall, as it were, in 1968, saying, we are here to civilise Britain. That's what the Black Power movement is doing. The Black Power movement is to civilise Britain. And I think my feeling about Farage and my feeling about what Darcus brought to British politics was that Darcus encouraged people to think. Darcus encouraged people to analyse and to use their brains. I think the very last sentence of the book is, we think, therefore we are. And this was kind of Darcus's political mantra. What he did in the 80s is he made, and 90s and in the noughties, was he made intelligent television programmes about politics and about race. And I think what Nigel Farage is trying to, is he's the absence of thought, he's the absence of reason, he's the knee-jerk, he's the kind of comfortable stereotypes and all this kind of stuff. So, yes. So how can we defeat Farage? I have really no idea. But my feeling is that what Darcus brought and what British politics needs desperately is intelligence and reason and thinking.
Yeah, just one tale. You see, when I make these serious statements, it's because I've heard things somewhere from people who I think are not saying this for some political reason, but perception of truth and experience. There was in Croydon Shopping Centre a steel band. You know what a steel band is in the carnival and so on. They came and they parked up outside the shopping centre. And there's a short, ugly man, a boxer, black fella. I never hated a face since I was born like that. And he coming up to her and saying, those people is who you're playing for. So it's Farage will have bought, according to that scheme between him and the black guy, brought this calypso music and steel band music. And the girl, long blonde hair, because I'm looking at her and how she holds the sticks and stuff. And then she just turned to him and said, we're not playing here. I'm not playing any music for those people over there. And Farage had to close down and go. I'm not making any circuitous route. He had to leave. And they turned on him. And the little boxer boy is only going to, I think they're going to kick his head in. So I was just saying that to illustrate that there are ways of knowing, and there is an art of listening.